Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Gopinath Shri Radhe, Jaya Radha Gopinath Shri Radhe, Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Gurudeva, 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 Jaya Gurudeva. Jai Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajacharya Ashtotra Shada Shri Srimad Bhaya Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajacharya Ashtotra Shada Shri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupada Srila Gorakishore Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupada Srila Satchidananda Bhaktivedanta Thakur Ki Jai Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnupada Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Gauriya Vaishnav Guru Varga Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Nantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Nitai Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bol O Gauri Samudavaris Hare Krishna O Gauri Samudavaris Hare Krishna O Gauri Samudavaris Hare Krishna O Gauri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga O Gauri Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vishnu Padaya Shrimati Radha Govinda Goswami Namine Namaste Prabhupada Ramachandra Krishna Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya So reading today from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 2, Text 12. Yan martya lilaupayikam svayoga maya balam dashayata grihitam Vismapanam svasya cha saubhagardhehe Param padam bhushana bhushanangam Yan martya lilaupayikam svayoga Maya balam darshayata grihitam Vismapanam svasya cha saubhagardhehe Param padam bhushana bhushanangam Yanmartya lilaupayikam svayoga Maya balam darshayata grihitam Vismapanam svasya cha saubhagardhehe Param padam bhushana bhushanangam Yanmartya lilaupayikam svayoga Maya balam darshayata grihitam Vishmapanam svasya cha saubhagardhe Param padam bhushana bhushanangam Yanmartya lilaupayikam svayoga Maya balam darshayata grihitam Vismapanam svasya cha saubhagardhe Param padam bhushana bhushanangam Yanmartya lilaupayikam svayoga Maya balam darshayata grihitam Vishmapanam svasya cha saubhagardhe Param padam bhushana bhushanangam Yat, his eternal form which Martya, mortal world Lila upayikam, just suitable for the pastimes Svayoga Maya Balam, potency of the internal energy. Darshayata, for manifestation. Grihitam, discovered. Vismapanam, wonderful. Swasya, of his own. Cha, and. Sobhag ridhehe, of the opulent. Param, supreme. Padam, ultimate stand. Bhushana, ornament. Bhushana angam, of the ornaments. In translation, the Lord appeared in the mortal world by his internal potency, Yoga Maya. He came in his eternal form, which is just suitable for his pastimes. These pastimes are wonderful for everyone, even for those proud of their own opulence, including the Lord himself in his form as the Lord of Vaikuntha. Thus his, Sri Krishna's, transcendental body is the ornament of all ornaments. Purport. In conformity with the Vedic hymns, Nityo Nityanam Chetanas Chetananam, the personality of Godhead is more excellent than all other living beings within all the universes in the material world. He is the chief of all living entities. No one can surpass him or be equal to him in wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, or renunciation. When Lord Krishna was within this universe, he seemed to be a human being because he appeared in a manner just suitable for his pastimes in the mortal world. He did not appear in human society in his Vaikuntha feature with 4 hands, because that would not have been suitable for his pastimes. But in spite of his appearing as a human being, no one was or is equal to him in any respect in any of the 6 different opulences. Everyone is more or less proud of his opulence in this world. But when Lord Krishna was in human society, he excelled all his contemporaries within the universe. When the Lord's pastimes are visible to the human eye, they are called prakat. And when they are not visible, they are called aprakat. In fact, the Lord's pastimes never stop, just as the sun never leaves the sky. The sun is always in its right orbit in the sky, but it is sometimes visible and sometimes invisible to our limited vision. Similarly, the pastimes of the Lord are always current in one universe or another. And when Lord Krishna disappeared from the transcendental abode of Dwarka, it was simply a disappearance from the eyes of the people there. It should not be misunderstood that his transcendental body, which is just suitable for the pastimes in the mortal world, is in any way inferior to his different expansions in the Vaikuntha lokas. His body manifested in the material world is transcendental par excellence, in the sense that his pastimes in the mortal world excel his mercy displayed in the Vaikuntha lokas. In the Vaikuntha lokas, the Lord is merciful toward the liberated or nitya mukta living entities. But in his pastimes in the mortal world, he is merciful even to the fallen souls who are nitya baddha, or conditioned forever. The 6 excellent opulences which he displayed in the mortal world by the agency of his internal potency, Yogamaya, are rare even in the Vaikuntha lokas. All his pastimes were manifested not by the material energy, but by his spiritual energy. The excellence of his Rasa Leela at Vrindavan and his householder life with 16,000 wives is wonderful even for Narayan in Vaikuntha, and is certainly so for other living entities within this mortal world. His pastimes are wonderful even for other incarnations of the Lord, such as Sri Rama, Nrsimha, and Varaha. His opulence was so super excellent that his pastimes were adored even by the Lord of Vaikuntha, who is not different from Lord Krishna himself. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Jnanatirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padkamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitam He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratushe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, welcome to Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today's shloka was a little bit tricky. I kept on slipping up on the third line especially. I remember last night I was actually staying up extra late because I was trying to get the third line down, and I thought, tomorrow I'm going to be tripping up a lot. But this, even though it's a little bit of a trickier shlok, this one is very nectarian. And especially this purport. I was really relishing it when I was reading through it yesterday. And I think there's a specific appeal in texts like this, in shloks like this, and in purports like this. For me, personally, I've found that there are many logical arguments we can make for Krishna consciousness. There are many profoundly effective arguments that can be made to show that Krishna consciousness is the highest philosophy. And there are so many because it is the highest philosophy. But there are so many ways we can reason around it. But ultimately, at least for me personally, I found the most compelling moments where I've been most convicted of the truth of Krishna consciousness, where I felt my faith to be the strongest, is not so much when I'm reading logical arguments, but just by hearing the sweet pastimes of Krishna. His Holiness Dhanurdhar Swami, he speaks of when he became convinced that he wants to shave up and join the Hare Krishnas. And it was when he received a book from a book distributor. Do you want to guess which book that was? Krishna book, yes. He got a Krishna book, and as he was reading it, he said the moment that he realized that this philosophy is just something else is not when he was thinking about logical arguments for the existence of God or anything else. It was when he was reading those wonderful pastimes of Krishna, and he said, there's no one who can be better than this who exists. No one could exist who's more charming than this, who's cooler than this, who's more loving than this, who's more capable of all of the fulfillments of activity, of pastime, of all of these things. So Dhanurdhar Swami, who's a great scholar, as we know. If anyone has read Waves of Devotion, they'll know that Maharaj is a tremendous scholar. But he was saying, this is the most profound reason, or at least this is the reason that shook him out of his maya, so to speak. How amazing, how astonishing is this Krishna. So I find, thank you, Prabhu. So I find purports and texts like this, they really speak to this. Because we are not like deists. Deists or deism was a very, very popular intellectual movement, especially in the Western world. Just after the Industrial Revolution sort of kicked off, everyone was very impressed by machines and physics and math and all of these things which allowed the great success of the Industrial Revolution, of which we are still suffering the consequences of today. After the great success of it all, they were very impressed by mathematics and logic and all. And suddenly, all the other different ways of thinking, such as beauty, philosophy in its more abstract metaphysical sense, these things became less of a concern, and everything became physics. Everything became mechanical interactions. And because of that, many Western intellectuals, they began to adopt this view called deism. It's like theism with the D in the front. Most of the founding fathers of America were deists. Winston Churchill, the great Asura, was also a deist. All sorts of figures from this sort of era were very, very absorbed in deism. My high school chemistry teacher was also a deist. And deism, again, was this idea that we can reduce God to, again, a step in physical reactions. What is God? God is someone, somewhere, who knows anything about him, who pushes the world into motion and then abandons it. Never touches it ever again. Doesn't do anything in of himself, just pushes it and lets it happen. Deism. But we are not so compelled by this philosophy. And honestly, no one really should be. It's a very dry and ugly philosophy, actually. To think that we're almost like, or to think that reality, all the spirit souls, are like abandoned children. The deism is just created, the deist God has just created and abandoned. And we would know that our previous acharyas would not accept a deistic God even as the Supreme Personality. As Srila Prabhupada has mentioned in this purport, Bhagavan is that personality who is full of all of the six opulences. And those six opulences, at the very least, we cannot prove that they are in the deistic God. So then, we instead have the complete opposite conception. We have the opposite conception of a Supreme Personality who is constantly present in the material world, in one of its universes or another, constantly manifesting his wonderful, transcendental, sweet pastimes. But also, as Srila Prabhupada mentions here, we should understand that Krishna is God before we dive into these pastimes. These pastimes are human-like and therefore very sweet. And their sweetness is brought out by their human-like nature. But first, one must understand that Krishna is God before they can forget him. This is the sort of flipping and back and forth that we find a lot in Krishna consciousness. The Kanishta Adhikari is defined by not being able to discriminate who is who. The Madhyamadhikari advances a bit and is able to tell who is who. And then the Uttamadhikari forgets that distinction again and can't tell who is who. Again, also with the realization of Krishna. Originally, a person must realize Krishna as God. Then they've gone beyond the atheistic platform. And then after a while, they advance enough to forget that Krishna is God. But first, somebody has to pass through the stage of realizing that Krishna is God. I remember one of my friends, he's a Muslim actually, but he was asking me, because he grew up in Pakistan, so he had some sort of exposure. He'd seen somewhere or another some Hindu temples. Actually, there was an ISKCON temple near his house, he was telling me. But he saw Radha Krishna and Mother Jashoda and Krishna, and he was sort of asking me, he was a little confused. Because of course we know Muslims have a very nirgun understanding of the Supreme Lord. So he was very confused. He was saying, who are these yellow people with Krishna? And he was asking these sort of things. And I was giving some sort of explanation, that we are not to understand that the parents are actually, that Krishna did not exist at one point, and then his body was created by his parents. We need to understand that they are expansions of his Shakti. And so I explained in as simply as I could a very complex topic. And so he went away somehow understanding that Krishna's parents are his parents, but they're not his parents in the same way I think of my parents. And at one point he could recite it well enough. And he told me later on, he was speaking to one of his other Muslim friends, who also was from Pakistan and therefore had heard of Krishna and Rama and Vishnu and Kali as well, I guess. And so he was telling my friend, he said, actually, you see this Krishna, he's got a mother and a father, he's got a girlfriend, he's got all of these things. I think he was just a normal man. He was just a prophet sent by Allah. And then eventually people just messed up the message and they started thinking he was God. And he said all of these sort of things. And actually there's a modern sect of Islam that formally teaches this, the Ahmadiyyas. They have their own prophet, and most Muslims don't consider them real Muslims. They don't pass the purity test. But the Ahmadiyyas formally hold this, but most mainline Sunni Muslims wouldn't. So anyway, so his friend was telling me the story afterwards. His friend started saying this, and then my Muslim friend, he whipped out, he said, no, Krishna is the source of all reality. Krishna is the source of all of these personalities. This is a misunderstanding. They do not understand Krishna as just a normal personality. Krishna is the source of all these other personalities. So I had a little giggle. I thought, this is very funny to see an Orthodox Sunni Muslim chastise a Muslim Prakrita Sahajiya. So first, we should understand that Krishna is God before we fully enter into the mindset of Krishna being human-like, of having his human-like pastimes. But at one point, these human-like pastimes are still the goal of spiritual life. And as much as we can logically ascertain that there is a God, we can understand through the intellect that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We can understand all of these things. But when it comes to Leela, in a sense, we have to abandon the intellect. Not because Leela runs against the mind, but because Leela is beyond it. So after having had understood, one then needs to, rather than go away from the intellect, move beyond it. G.K. Chesterton is a very famous Christian author, and he's very profound for the context he's in. And he has this wonderful quote where he speaks about the mysteries of God. How can God appear to do this and that? And he says the riddles of God are more satisfying than the solutions of man. At one point, Leela, it seems almost inconceivable. As my Muslim friend's other friend was or actually as my Muslim friend himself, he was getting very confused how these pastimes could work. How can God have parents? How can he be nurtured by them? These are things we can, again, philosophically understand, but to fully enter into the flow, into the appreciation of it, the mind becomes a bit of an obstacle. Not again because Leela is against logic, but because Leela is beyond logic. It is not irrational, we could say it is transrational. It moves beyond the rational domain. We can say almost that the intellectual thought process is like a runway, and eventually you have to fly off it in order to enter into the Leela. There's another sort of quote that I remember from another Catholic author, which is, I thought, very relevant to this. And he was speaking about how sometimes people want to approach even faithful theistic people, not just the academic folk, but even faithful theistic people will try to approach the Supreme Lord, and they'll try to intellectually understand this and that. What is the intellectual significance of this? What is this? And they try to pull it apart. They don't appreciate it for what it is. And he tells a very sweet parable of a beautiful tower that stands next to the sea. On the beach, there is this wonderful old tower that has stood for hundreds of years. And so comes along a man who very much loves this tower. He thinks this tower is very, very cool. So he goes up to the tower and he decides, I want to know more about this tower. I want to understand this tower deeper and deeper and deeper. So what does he start doing? He takes one brick off, and then he takes another brick off. And bit by bit, he analyzes every single brick. And he finds some really cool things. He finds, oh, this brick comes from a German source. Oh, this brick seems to be from a different century than the other brick. And he finds lots of really, really cool details. And so he understands a lot intellectually about the tower. And you could say he's almost an expert in the tower. But then he finishes the story with a really sweet line. Because now that the tower had been disassembled, the person who had done all that great study, he had forgotten that when the tower was fully built, you could see all of the ocean with it. And now you couldn't see the ocean anymore. The beauty of the ocean was gone. And what is the value of the tower, if not all the beauty you could see at the top of it? What is the value of knowing what is behind every brick? So like this, Leela, especially the human-like Leela of Krishna, they're very valuable and they're very profound, almost on their own terms. Again, I still remember, I do like to read logical sort of arguments and all, and actually I get a weird sense of sense gratification out of it, if I'll be honest. But I do like all of those things. But as I said before, I've personally never felt so much strongly built in my faith, as much as when I'm simply hearing the pastimes of Krishna. And in this sense, Krishna Katha, it's a very potent thing. I still remember, I think, if I can say, the time I felt most firmly situated in my Krishna consciousness, which is not that firmly situated, but still, the time I felt the most firmly situated in my Krishna consciousness was just after I was initiated. I was in Mayapur, and I was invited. A small group of people were in His Grace Madhavananda Prabhu. He was giving Krishna Katha. There was only a small room. He said, we're not filming it or anything. We want that intimacy of devotees sharing pastimes of Krishna together. And I remember sitting down in that room, and Prabhu, he was not speaking about 50 logical proofs of why God exists. He was not speaking how we can defend the Bhagavatam against the rascal academics. And don't get me wrong, there's a very good place for these things. But instead, he was speaking about Mahaprabhu, dancing. Mahaprabhu in the Gambhira, he was talking about Krishna, running around having his sweet pastimes with all the cowherd boys. And with hearing all those pastimes, I can't logically say why they were so convincing, but I can say the aesthetic experience, that experience of so much beauty, so much sweetness. How can this not be the absolute truth? How can this not be? How can something that is so soul-stirring not speak to the absolute truth of Krishna consciousness? There's a similar sort of parable I once heard, parable so to speak, of the Eiffel Tower. And this person was sort of trying to make a point. And he said, if I took you to France, and we went to France together, and I took you and we went on 2 tours, and we had 2 tour guides, one after the other. The first tour guide, he takes us to the Eiffel Tower, and he points to the Eiffel Tower and he says, this Eiffel Tower, it's made of 20% iron, 30% whatever. I don't know how to make an Eiffel Tower, but it's made from all of these composite materials. And it's this many meters tall, and it weighs this many kilograms. And for half an hour, he speaks about the exact composition, the exact amount of rust that's on the Eiffel Tower, how much it sways when the wind blows. He speaks all of these stories, all of these facts. That's the first tour guide. And the second tour guide, he comes along, and he only speaks for 15 minutes, not half an hour, like the illustrious scholar that the first tour guide was. And he only speaks for 15 minutes. But he says a story, and this isn't an actual story. I can't remember what the actual story was because it was actually pretty boring. But, but he says some story, and the story is about how the person who designed the Eiffel Tower was actually having an affair with the head builder's wife, and that resulted in him changing the design so that the head builder would fall off to his death, or something like that. Some wonderful, exquisite story about the Eiffel Tower. Even though he speaks for only 15 minutes, I don't know anyone who would say they'd rather have the tour guide who was the first one, who spoke for half an hour. Because naturally, we like stories. Naturally, this is our nature. We like pastimes. We like people doing things. We like activity more than fact. Story speaks so much greater than fact. Pastime speaks so much greater than facts. And in this sense, the word myth is sometimes used positively. Of course, we're used to hearing myth meaning, oh, it didn't really happen. That's a myth, Prabhu. We're used to hearing in that sense. But in another sense, the word myth is sometimes used to mean a story that conveys something that's beyond logic. A story that captures something very deep about humanity. And in this sense, myths are the most profound truth. And we naturally enjoy them oh so much more than facts. So it is in this that we understand pastimes, lila. This is the high, complete form of truth. How can truth be a fact like the Mayavadis say, of absolute oneness? Already now we find fact so unappealing when compared to the beauty of pastime. And this is not saying that Krishna must be what we want him to be. This is not saying the Supreme Lord must be what we enjoy. But rather it makes sense if the Supreme Lord is our source, that what we enjoy, that the Supreme Lord has made it, that what we enjoy is him in his fullness, what we are geared towards. Srila Prabhupada gives that wonderful example of the screw that has fallen out of the machine. It will feel useless until we screw it back in. So we can infer then from the screw a little bit, roughly, what the hole to put the screw into is like. So we can sort of trace backwards a vague trajectory. The soul ultimately finds very little nourishment from fact, but so much even from the rubbish sort of stories we have today. And this is why we find no matter how much people will try to claim we are now rational, logical beings, they will still always come back to stories. As you will hear any atheists, they will speak. And atheists, the big champions of reasonability and logic. But they will say things. They will all sit together and relish science katha. Oh, did you hear how Galileo resisted the Catholic Church? A victory of science against those ignorant theists. Oh, Charles Darwin sailing, I forgot the name of the boat, but if you ask an atheist, they'll be able to tell you the boat's name. They'll be able to tell you the tour. Many of the very devout and pious atheists will even be able to tell you the name of the island where he saw the bird with the beak or whatever. Charles Darwin, the great prophet. Let us hear the pastimes of his grand revelation. Even the atheists who are so much absorbed in the beauties of being a purely rational human being, even they cannot help constructing their own pastimes. But in Krishna consciousness, we have a leg up on everyone else relishing their own pastimes. A, because our ones actually happened, and B, because we do not, as the atheists and all the other people of the world, even the apathetic, the apatheists, as sometimes people call them, they just don't really care. They're apathetic to theism. Even they have their myths. oh, I'll get a good job, I'll be happy. This is a story. There's no logic behind this. There's no mathematical formula to prove I'll be happy watching TV, doing drugs, doing whatever. There's no logical proof behind this, and yet it is a myth that they absorb themselves in. And as we can see in the atheists and the apatheists and in most other people, it hasn't been very fruitful, those myths. So what is the leg up that we have in our pastimes? In our stories that we relish so much? It's actually a very foundational and basic point Srila Prabhupada makes in his Ishopanishad. They are all trying to go through the Aroha Pantha. They are all constructing their own ways, their own stories to which to approach that full story, that full lila, that full pastime. They have a feeling that it's there, as we all should. Jiver Shurupoy, Krishna Nityadas. There's those inklings, those hints in our soul that there is a full pastime, a myth, so to speak, but a myth that actually happened, a myth that is fully fulfilling. So them going through their Aroha Pantha, they try to construct them as they go along. And they'll construct all sorts of myths. But in Krishna consciousness, we have that great advantage of having pastimes that came through the Avaroha Pantha. Krishna, that fullness of pastimes, that fullness of story, which humanity so much revolves around. You will not find a single human on earth who does not have stories by which they base their life on. There's a thing in evangelical Christian circles, they'll have these bands they wear on their wrist, and it says WWJD, what would Jesus do? Because that story of Jesus is something that they've based their life on. These days, unfortunately, we've seen this degrade. I've had the very, very unfortunate experience of having my friends say, oh, what would Captain America do? Jai. So, no matter what, people will construct stories because they must. Again, we are made to relish pastime, but instead people relish the transcendental pastimes of Srila Captain America. So, this is the problem. But again, we have the Avaroha Lila, through the Avaroha Pantha. Avaroha, Ava means to descend. So we have Avatar. The avatars come down and they reveal these wonderful, beautiful pastimes. And as Srila Prabhupada mentions here, there's prakat and aprakat pastimes. So in a sense, the word avatar sometimes can have a kanishta sort of meaning, where we think Krishna is not here, and then he comes down, and then he's here, and then he goes back. But in another sense, a deeper understanding of the word avatar is Krishna is always present, especially in Vrindavan Dham. It's no longer in the category of prakat or aprakat. It's either aprakat prakat or prakat aprakat, one of the two. It's the two words put together. And it means a place where the pastimes are still happening invisibly. And that's why you see the great devotees when they go to Vrindavana, so they're seeing the pastimes happening. That is what they're perceiving. So, we can think that Krishna comes down and then he leaves. But a deeper understanding is that Krishna is always there. And the avatar is when he descends from that invisible form in a way that everyone can see. This is the avatar. It is the descent into material vision, so that even those on the platform of material vision can perceive him. And then when that avatar happens, then everyone has the great fortune of witnessing again the true myth, if you will, the fullest story, the full pastimes. This is avatar. And so it is because of his pastimes, because of his leelas that Krishna, he is so wonderful, so full of those 6 opulences which make him Bhagavan. And therefore, the gopis, they sing, Tava katamritam tapta jivanam kavibhiri ditam kalmashapaham. And actually, I was listening to a class, and in it, we can find the 6 opulences in this text. We can hear Tava katamritam tapta jivanam kavibhiri ditam. So here we hear katamritam. The Krishna Katha, the pastimes of Krishna, they are amrit. Amrit means amrit, to give life, or rather to cure death. And so it is life-giving. But it is life-giving to who? Tapta jivanam. Those jivas who are suffering in this material world. But in order to be liberated from the suffering of the material world, what does this mean? We are renounced from the material world. And therefore there's full renunciation in Krishna Katha as well. It gives that renunciation even to those who hear it. Tapta jivanam, they are freed from this. But also, kavibhir iditam, it is glorified by those great kavis, those great poets. And those great poets are great scholars. They are great appreciators of transcendental truth. And therefore kavi, kavibhir iditam means there is the fullness of knowledge. Because who knows knowledge better than the great poets who are so absorbed in words? So there we find knowledge and renunciation. And also a bit of the beauty. Because kavis, they're poets. Beauty is definitely there. And then what do we hear? Kalmashapaham. Kalmashapaham. It destroys all sinful reactions. We know sinful reactions are very demonic. We hear that Mahaprabhu, he has come to kill all the demons. How? By destroying all of the sinful tendencies in the jivas. So, to destroy the sins in many ways is to destroy the demoniac personalities. And therefore, kalmashapaham, in order to be able to conquer such things, one needs to be very strong, very powerful, in order to conquer even sinful reactions. And therefore, kalmashapaham, there we find the fullness of strength. Viryasya. And then Shravana Mangalam. Shravana Mangalam. Everyone is made auspicious upon hearing it. There is, as Srila Prabhupada renders this in CC, Chaitanya Charitamrita, he says one derives spiritual benefit by hearing this. And what happens when one derives spiritual benefit? They become a devotee, they become spiritually advanced. And what else do we read in Chaitanya Charitamrita? Madhavendra Puri is running away from all the fame that comes to those who are spiritually benefited. Wherever there is auspiciousness, wherever there is the devotee, fame naturally follows. And therefore, Shravana Mangalam, it speaks of the fame, which comes not just the fullness of Krishna, but Krishna Katha, Krishna Leela. And then we have almost the cheating one, Shrimat. Because Shrimat means what? Empowered by that internal potency. And what is not present there? Wealth, beauty, power. These especially are evoked by the spiritual potency of the Lord. So, Shrimat, wealth. We know Lakshmi Devi, full of wealth. Beauty, what to speak of the beauty of the divine feminine. And then power, because of course, this is the potency of the Lord that it is filled with. And then finally, Atatam. Atatam, it is spreading all over the world. And to spread all over the world, something needs to not be for simple words, so to speak, simple words from the material vision to spread all over the world. They must be able to never decay. And if they never decay, because they must never decay, otherwise how could they reach all over the world? If they never decay, then there can be no wealth greater than that. And there can be no power greater than that. Nothing can conquer Harikatha, nothing can conquer Krishna Kathamritam. Nothing can conquer that. And therefore, we find all of the six opulences fully in Krishna Leela, in Krishna Katha. So, we find here, even in his pastimes, Krishna, he is most full of these six. And because of his pastimes, he is full of these most six. And his pastimes themselves, because they are non-different to Krishna, they are full of all of these six. So, just quickly, I have one final point to make about the Leela, and then I'll wrap up. I don't want to go too much over time. We have then these Leelas. And we have the question then, these Leelas are wonderful, but what do we do with them? Do we just sit there statically and appreciate them? No, not at all. Actually, we are meant to join these Leelas. These leelas are so wonderful, and Krishna's leelas, again, go beyond the standard myth and stories of regular stories and myths that are constructed. Why? Because these ones are always happening, and therefore we are always able to enter them. And how do we enter them? We hear one pastime. I was going to say it fully, but I don't want to take all your time. We hear after Krishna was delivered to Vrindavan, not to Vrindavan, after Krishna was delivered to Mother Jashoda, we know Vasudeva, he was very worried. He was very worried of all of the things that would happen, knowing Kamsa's desire to kill his future killer. So because of this, Vasudeva, he went and he spoke to Nanda Maharaj. And he told him all of these things. And all the men, they went and they heard this conference where Vasudeva, he's saying, watch out. Kamsa is going to send some very bad trouble. And of course, Nanda Maharaj, he very much respected this because Nanda Maharaj is very simple and he was very impressed by his city-dwelling relatives' deep knowledge. Nanda Maharaj, he grew up on the farm learning this and that, and Vasudeva went to UNSW. So to speak. So there was that great respect. So Nanda Maharaj, he very much took this on board. But while this was happening, Kamsa, he had to recruit somebody in order to kill all the children in the Vraj area, just to be sure. And my spiritual master says that actually Putana, she volunteered. It wasn't that Kamsa had to say, please kill all the children. Putana was so twisted that she said, oh, killing children, I'll do that. I'll sign up for that. And so she went, and there's long descriptions, and again, I won't get into them. But Putana went, and we hear Shukdev Goswami, he glorifies her beautiful form that she takes when she transforms. Actually, I remember I was telling one youth to read Krishna book, and he rang me one day, quickly rang me, and I picked up, and he seemed a little distraught, and he said, Prabhu, you know how you say it's bad to get lusty if you read the Ras Leela? And I said, yes, I was a little worried. Where is this going? And he said, you know, Prabhu, I'm getting a little lusty reading the Putana Leela. I thought, oh, Prabhu, Prabhu, what are you doing? What are you doing, Prabhu? I thought, hopefully, at the very least, hopefully it was after the transformation, not before it. But actually, this is not very different to lust that he would be experiencing in his life day to day anyways. There's not much more beauty in the material bodies that we see around us than there was in Putana. Maybe a tiny bit more, but not much more. So then after I thought, actually, no, this is just the standard conditioning. We're taught to find so much beauty in things which aren't very beautiful at all. But Shukdev Goswami still describes very beautifully Putana. If we read the descriptions of her hair and her beautiful smile and how much she captivated everyone. And there's a reason for this, and that'll be the point that I'll conclude with. So she goes past all of the other houses. Srila Prabhupada says, how could somebody like Putana enter Vraj? Because she was allowed to by the internal potency. The internal potency pulled her in. But the internal potency didn't just pull her in for the pastime to happen. Also, it pulled her in directly to Krishna so that all the other children would be protected. So like this, Yogamaya pulls in Putana. And Putana sees Krishna. And Krishna is there. And she's so filled with love. And Mother Jashoda and Rohini, they stop feeding Krishna. They don't want to feed. They think, here is the goddess of fortune herself. Let Krishna be breastfed by her. And so, Putana, she goes forth. And she sees Krishna. And she feels that maternal feeling. Everyone is captivated. But Krishna, he closes his eyes almost as in fear. And I won't get into this. Actually, I was listening. My spiritual master was giving Putana Katha. And he spoke for 45 minutes on the importance of Krishna closing his eyes. So I won't get into all of those. But there's a lot of really deep purports to this. One is that Krishna thought, darshan means that the Supreme Lord sees you. And he thinks, who is this demon? I'm giving my darshan freely to everyone in Vraj. But I will not give my darshan to a demon like this. Another meaning is that he thought, actually, I will have to kill this demon. And even though demons are demonic, they are still all like my children. I'm Krishna, the seed-giving father of all. So I don't want to see, especially in my innocence, oh, what's become of me? The first demon I have to kill is a female demon as well, a woman. So Krishna, he closes his eyes and thinks, okay, let's get this over and done with. Let's quickly clean this up. There's many, many other reasons. The last one that I'll say of the long list my spiritual master was giving is that another reason that's given is that Krishna actually prayed to Shiva. Krishna then, he closed his eyes and he prayed to Shiva and he said, Shiva, you can drink oceans of poison. Please come on my tongue and drink this poison so I don't die. Again, the Nara-like, the human-like pastimes of Krishna. Krishna is praying to Shiva, Shiva, please protect me. You can drink an ocean of poison. You will be able to drink just this tiny bit of poison. And then we know how the pastime goes. Again, I'll condense it. Krishna, he grabs on and he sucks not just the milk, not just the poison, but also the very life force of Putana. Putana, she wails and she goes, she flails around, and her beautiful hair, her wonderful quality, the full hips, all the malika flowers, they're all gone. And instead crashes down now a very dead demoness, crushing all the trees 20 meters around it. They were so crushed, they didn't just fall down, they actually became like powder. This was the impact of Putana hitting down. Because she had taken Krishna like a snake on her lap. Krishna, who had almost concealed his godhood by being like fire covered by ash. But then she realized what had happened. And then she was saying, please, please don't kill me, but Krishna, he killed her anyways. And so then, as she was wailing, we hear all the mountains of earth, also all the lower planets, Rasatala, Atala, Talatala, Sutala, all of these planets, they were all shaking. This was the great power of Putana. But Krishna, he simply just killed her like that. But then, what happened to her? We know, Putana, she received such a wonderful position as another devotee in Vatsalya Ras. Another gopi, elderly gopi, tasting Vatsalya Ras. And of course, this is used to glorify in a very similar way Shishupala is glorified. How merciful the Lord is. As long as we have some sentiment towards him, he'll reciprocate. But what is the specific sentiment? What is the specific sentiment that allowed Putana to enter into Krishna Lila? Because here we find Putana in many ways is our great acharya. In many ways, Putana, she has shown us the way. How can a person of demoniac tendencies, of demoniac tastes, how can they enter into Krishna Lila? So she is showing very much our sadhana. She's revealing it. And what do we hear? We hear two things. Brahma, after the Brahma Vimohan Lila, he praised the glories of Krishna, and he says, you gave Putana such a great reward. Why? Because of Sadvesh. She decorated herself with Sadvesh, the clothes of those in Vraj. She dressed herself like your devotees dress. The cowherd maidens. She dressed herself like an elderly gopi, or rather a middle-aged gopi actually. She dressed herself like a middle-aged gopi. And therefore she had the appearance of her. And elsewhere in the purports, Prabhupada says, because she came and she approached in the manner of a gopi, therefore she received this. And this is why my spiritual master says Shukadev Goswami speaks so positively about Putana's appearance. Not just to show how the denizens of Vraj were captivated by her beauty, but also how she had come fully in the mood of a devotee. How she had come fully attempting to be like the devotees there. And because she had this attitude, because she immersed herself in the Leela, then Krishna accepted herself in the Leela. She approached the Leela with that intent to join it. And even if she wished to join it for bad, negative reasons, she joined with that intent. So to follow in the footsteps of the devotees who we see around us, this is the means by which we can enter into the Leela. Because Srila Prabhupada, we should not think he is not in Leela. He is in Gaura Leela. Srila Prabhupada's Leela is just the latest installment in the beauties of Mahaprabhu's Leela. So this is the way by which we can enter into these Leelas, which are so fulfilling. Sadvesh, by dressing and acting and behaving in the way of those who are fully immersed in the Leela are. And then eventually after that, we can also follow in the ways and manners of those higher rasic devotees. But that all comes first when we go through the means of Srila Prabhupada and Gaur Leela. Gaur Leela is both the beginning and end. The most basic tattva and the highest tattvas are all there. And then one can enter into those highest leelas. And what is the beauty of those highest leelas? Those highest leelas are most beautiful because after Putana was killed, all of the gopis, they all ran. And what did? They didn't say, wow, Krishna, the demon slayer. No, they took the tail, Prabhupada says, the switch of the calves, and they brush him off. They smear him with the cow urine to try and protect him. And what do? They invoke Harinam. They pray to the Supreme Lord to protect Krishna. And what does Krishna do? He reciprocates this. Happily, he accepts their prayers. Pray to the Supreme Lord for my protection. This is fine. This is the sweetness of those leelas. Which is why we can sometimes think, and this, I promise this is the actual last point. This is why we can think, of the 6 opulences of Krishna, the one that always made the least sense to me is renunciation. Krishna's not renounced. Krishna's not renounced. As Prabhupada mentions, he's running around with thousands of wives, and not even his wives in the Ras Leela, those very high things. That's not renunciation. And there is a philosophical answer we can give. I won't give it because I don't want to go over time. But there's a philosophical answer we can give. But the higher answer that we can also give, and Prabhupada gives this in Bhagavad Gita as it is that Krishna is most renounced because even though he is the fullness of all potencies, even though he is the fullness of Bhagavan, even though he has all power, omniscience, omnipotency, there is nothing which Krishna cannot claim as his own. Krishna has everything. Krishna renounces all of it, even his own godhood, in order to reciprocate with his wonderful devotees. And in this sense, we can understand Krishna as the most renounced, because he renounces even his status as a supreme being in order to reciprocate the love of his devotees. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Padaya Shrimate Radha Govinda Goswami.